Top 10 classic rock bands of all time. Today, let's take a look at the best classic rock bands of all time. These range from the 60s to the current day. There have been so many great bands over the years. Many are fronted by iconic and perhaps some would say eccentric lead singers. Most of those in the list are best-selling artists of all time, and we can't wait to talk about them. The late 60s and early 70s were an era when music had a different impact on life. There were not so many bands as there are now. Moreover, people tended to listen to instrumental bands with more interest. For instance, the album Tarkus by Emerson, Lake and Palmer in 1972. Superbands, as they were known, formed many a conversation in relation to who was the best musician. Fame and fortune were rarely, if at all, discussed or even noticed. This was the era of the record and later cassette tapes. CDs, MP3s, and streaming of music were not even invented. Buying an album on vinyl was a serious undertaking. Gatherings would often take part at parties or informal social meetings to sit quietly and listen to the full album, not as nowadays just a track or two. Lastly, album artwork played a significant part in the success of a release. Of the music, nothing needed to be said. It spoke for itself to the dedicated band fans. So without hesitation, here are our top 10 of the greatest rock bands of all time. Let's get started. Before we start the video, make sure to like and subscribe to our channel and you will not miss our new video. 1. The Rolling Stones. Firstly, this band is widely acclaimed as one of the best-selling artists of all time and best rock band of all time. Led by the highly influential Sir Mick Jagger, the Stones, as they were better known, came to prominence in the 1960s. Over a span of some 60 years from 1962, they produced 92 albums, including compilations and 121 singles. Many have tried, but few managed to match the mouthy frontman Mick for his style of singing, tinged with a strong accent and forceful delivery. They were for many the iconic band of the 60s. Fiercely intelligent, the band members were able to reinvent themselves across the years, maintaining a significant following for some 60 years. Band members included Jagger, Keith Richards, Ronnie Wood, and Charlie Watts, each of which has influenced many generations of musicians. 2. The Beatles. Arguably one of, if not the most influential and best 60s rock bands, from early beginnings in 1956 as the Quarrymen, later in 1960 becoming the Beatles, and with early album releases such as Please, Please Me, 1963, Twist and Shout, 1964, they remain respected and revered to this day for their songcraft and musicianship. At the time, when youth of the late 50s needed a sense of belonging, the Beatles arrived in Liverpool, and they were different. Compared to the Stones, they were less publicly and visually rebellious, fronting a clean, homely image, even though they were also known for their drug and hippie influences in the early 1960s. Additionally, their music and personas caught the imagination of the masses, and scenes of mass hysteria were commonplace. Over a period of years, they would produce 213 songs and became household names. The band comprised the late John Lennon, Sir Paul McCartney, Ringo Starr, and George Harrison. 3. The Who. An English rock band formed in 1964 who were loud and proud and committed to large-scale live concerts. Again, fronted by a force of nature in the form of Roger Daltrey as lead singer and backed by what were to become and remain to this day legends of rock. Pete Townshend on guitar, the late Keith Moon on drums, and the late Paul Entwistle on bass. Banned from returning to Southampton Guildhall for being too loud and damaging the foundations, I can remember standing opposite in the bus station and clearly hearing the concert for free. This was a band to rock out to. Additionally, ear defenders were not part of the scene in those days, and coming home from a concert hardly able to hear was the expectation after a live concert. 4. Z's Top. Over in America, long hair and beards were in, rather than the clean-cut, homely image of the Beatles in the UK. Formed in 1969, a bit later than the Beatles and The Who, they quickly gained a cult following. Billy Gibbons, Dusty Hill, and Frank Beard are the band members. They had a distinctive look, different for the time, each member sporting long bushy beards. They were perhaps less popular in Europe as the band based its performances around sexual innuendo and Texan stereotypes. 5. Genesis. Genesis were formed as another supergroup. Formed as a school band in 1969 and originally fronted by rock legend Pete Townshend, the band's intelligence came through in their deep lyrics and intricate melodic musicality. The band were known for progressive rock throughout the 70s, but have become more pop-oriented over the years as fan bases changed and prog became less commercially viable. A change in the lineup in the early 70s, and fortune came about when the drummer Phil Collins was recruited to replace the original drummer as Pete Townshend left the group in 1974. 6. Led Zeppelin. Another A-list giant from the same era, Led Zeppelin first appeared in 1968. of rock legends Robert Plant, who wrote the abundance of the lyrics, Jimmy Page, John Paul Jones, and John Bonham formed the lineup. Again, Led Zeppelin are known to be one of the best-selling rock bands of all time. Their music was more guitar-based, seminally influencing the heavy metal genre going forward. Similar to The Who, Led Zeppelin were a stadium rock band, originally known as the Yardbirds. 7. Pink Floyd. Another Stoon band, this time a progressive rock band from the UK, formed in 1965 into the swinging London music scene. The band had an intelligence brought from architectural students Roger Waters and Nick Mason. The songs of Pink Floyd influenced the time as reflected in the somewhat psychedelic nature of their arrangements, being known for long instrumental tracks and performances. The band wrote 165 songs, including the classics Interstellar, Overdrive, One of These Days, Comfortably Numb, Run Like Hell. 70s albums of note On the Wall, 1979, Animals, 1977, and of course, Dark Side of the Moon, 1973. 8. Guns N' Roses. One of, if not the best American rock bands. Guns N' Roses from Lay formed in 1985, most famed for Axl Rose on vocals and the larger-than-life character Slash on guitar. Slash came and went, returning in 2016, but has formed a very well-respected, some would say the definitive rock guitarist role model, both in attitude and technique. 9. AC/DC, an Australian rock band formed in 1973 with heavy roots in Scotland by means of the brothers Angus and Malcolm Young, joined by Bon Scott, Phil Rudd, and Mark Evans. Scott died in a tragic drinking incident and was replaced by the characterful Brian Johnson. The lineup now comprises Angus and Stevie Young, Brian, Phil Rudd, and Cliff Williams, Mark Evans having been sacked from the band. Their first success came in 1976 in London, UK, where the band quickly became legendary. The compilation album High Voltage was the group's first major hit in the same year. 10. Queen, another British rock band of the 70s, with a famous lineup: Freddie Mercury, Roger Taylor, Brian May, and John Deacon. Their first album was released in 1973, Queen. Freddie Mercury was, by any judgment, one of the most charismatic frontmen of all time. The list of albums and tours is huge. A momentous highlight was the 1985 Live Aid in Wembley, London, UK. Nearly 2 billion watched via TV, and Queen's performance is said to be one of the most iconic rock performances ever. Which rock band is the best? So there you have it. Of course, there are bands from other eras or genres. Who would you have picked as the best 80s rock bands, best 90s rock bands, or best new rock bands? There are so many to choose from. Do you agree? Who do you think are the best rock bands of all time? Who do you think we have missed off? Are modern rock bands better, or have they succumbed to the pop influence too heavily? Has the golden age of rock finally passed, or does it live on in new and exciting bands, or perhaps within the indie genre, still to be discovered by a wider audience? Will rock undergo a revival in the next 10 years? If you find this video useful, don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel.